On. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Planters Knowledge. I know y'all probably said, boy, you came on here like gangbusters. Well, I am here with Liz Lawless herself. I am so excited to have her on the show today. So, again, welcome everyone to Planters Knowledge. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Be sure to get a pen, paper, open up a tab, something to grab some notes because Liz is always sharing so much valuable information. I want to make sure you capture it. Of course, you can always catch the replay. Be sure to subscribe to Ask Dr. Walls 525 and also be sure to share the link as well. So, here at Planners Knowledge, it is about interviewing authors, learning about their author's journey, their books, their genres, and so forth. And so, as I mentioned, I'm super excited to have Liz. Liz, we've had the pleasure of knowing each other for over 10 years now at this point.
Yeah, so y'all very first, when y'all had your weekly show,
Uh-huh.
they were kind enough to have us on to talk about the Black Rodeo. And I guess
Yeah.
Cleo was probably on first.
Yep.
Mr. Hearn, Cleo Hearn's the founder of the rodeo. We'll talk about his book here in a little bit. But yeah, so been great friends ever since. We were, I don't know, sisters and brothers, separated at birth or
That's
something.
right.
I'm not sure. Luckily, we can choose our family too.
Come
We
on.
can choose our biological family, but we can choose our other family.
That's right. That's
So
right.
certainly, I'm certainly excited to be on too, and I love what you're doing as far as your author work and
Thank
how you're
you.
branching out with your new stuff. And we know because we deal a lot with schools and
Yeah.
children, and they need that emotional development, social development, because they don't always get it at home like we did when I was growing up.
Yep.
I had parents in the home. I had other parents in the neighborhood. I had a group of friends that I've been friends with, 8 of us, I guess, since kindergarten. And
Mm.
we still get together, but not our, but my kids, our niece and nephews, they don't have that.
Yeah.
They maybe
Yeah.
have one friend or two friends from high school or college or work, but, they don't have that same emotional and
That.
social development
Yeah.
that I had, which
Yeah.
one of the things I hate about, people moving so much. And, like you say, there are great things about technology. And then there's some things that aren't really so great,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we
Well,
just have to adapt.
let's get people into knowing who you are and how you became connected with the Cowboys of Color. So let's just give them a little background about who you are.
Well, why don't we start a little further back? I was never a writer as a kid. I mean, I wrote in a journal, but I was always a reader. My
Mm-hmm.
favorite place was the library to go. My favorite place at school was the library, the public library. Every Saturday, my mom would take us. And very interesting, Kathleen, probably about 2 years ago now, though, I was on a call with a guy and he said, I said, I've been in the business a long time, thinking 30 years or whatever. And he said, well, you must have started really young. He was being nice,
Uh-huh.
because he was probably 30, and obviously I'm not 30. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I was like, it was like, wow. I said, in actual fact, I've been in the book business since 1972.
Wow.
I was 11 because my parents opened up a Christian bookstore. My mother opened a bookstore, a brick and mortar
Oh my
store.
goodness.
And of course, I worked. And back then, we had to do inventory by hand. So my job
Mm-hmm.
was to count the children's books and
Mm-hmm.
the children's area, and it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes. Yes.
Well, we didn't have all this electronic stuff. So I've always been a reader, and I was lucky that I had access to books.
Mm-hmm.
The library in
Mm-hmm.
my early years, and then a bookstore. And we were, even though we were a Christian bookstore with Bibles and commentaries and things like that, we had mass market, books too.
Yes.
We had fiction books and we had children's books. And so I was lucky in that I had access, and that's the shame of it. A lot of kids today don't necessarily
Yes.
have
Yes.
access. So one of the things we try to do is give books to kids that are homeless or the working poor,
Nice.
because they might get, given books that are half price or that were donated or somebody else had and gave away, but
Yes.
they don't get new books. And so
Mm.
that's one of the things we try to do. So I've been in it a long time, but I didn't start writing until I went to college.
Okay.
I majored in journalism and speech, and they taught me how to write. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm a nonfiction writer. So
Okay.
once we start talking about my books, you'll kind of go, I mean, I have one fiction book, but it really is a fact fiction book. It's based
Okay.
on factual knowledge about how the brain works and
Mm-hmm.
creativity, but I made up the story. But that's
Gotcha.
really the only fiction book I have because I was a journalist, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't have blank page syndrome. I don't have
Okay.
blank page syndrome. People go, I've got writer's block. I
You
never
don't have
have
that.
writer's block because I can always say who, what, where, when, how,
Gotcha.
why, which is a newspaper journalism, for the story, and it
Yes.
always had the main subject always had to be in the first 25 words because people might not read the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
So you had
Mm-hmm.
to get the important stuff, up front.
Right. Right. Capture their attention, give them the information, and
Yeah,
keep going.
and keep going. So that was kind of how I really started. So I had that journalism background, but when I got out of school, I was like, well, could I really write creative? Because I did want to write.
Great
I
question.
knew I wanted to publish books, but I was really thinking like devotional,
Mm-hmm.
biblical related, because like you say, I grew up in the church. I grew up with this Christian bookstore background, my parents,
Mm-hmm.
my grandparents. And so, and I learned early on to speak because at
Mm-hmm.
church we used to have these little devotionals and they would let the kids get up and present or do a little 5-minute kind of talk,
Yes.
and so that always, helped me. And I learned early on to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I came home from college and my mother and I wanted to do something together and we took a creative writing class
Okay.
at the junior college. So you can start anywhere,
Yes.
and you can write, like you say, about anything. And we'll talk about genres and stuff shortly.
Yes.
But yeah, so we went and we had to have different stories. Like we had to write like a vacation story or a summer thing or, your favorite thing. And
Mm-hmm.
she had told us, the teacher told us in the first year, we had to write like a monster story or a horror story or whatever, all these different kind of genres, we
Yes.
were trying to write. She was trying to get us to write kind of different things.
Uh-huh.
And I just struggled and struggled because I'm not a horror I don't
Me
like that
either.
kind of genre. I don't
Yes.
read horror books. I don't watch horror movies.
Yes.
Once in a while I got drugged to one when I was a kid, but it's just not my thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I struggled and struggled, but I had been watching a series on the brain, a
Mm-hmm.
13-part series on the brain. And I was having that struggle with creativity. Could I be a creative writer versus
Mm-hmm.
writing for the newspaper or a
Mm-hmm.
magazine or something? And so I wrote this story like the night before it was due. Journalism major, we're always under a deadline. We're
Uh-huh.
deadline, when we got to get it done. Wait till the last minute. But I was so uncomfortable with this
Mm.
story. But I went in and had met with the instructor, and she said, "This is probably the best thing you've written all year, season."
Wow.
And I was like, "What?" I mean, I almost fell off my chair. I was so stunned, and I said, "This was the most uncomfortable story I've ever written." And she said, "That's why it's the best story."
Oh, look at
So
that.
wasn't that a tip early on? A
Mm-hmm.
tip that if you're uncomfortable with it, maybe it's better than you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So don't throw away the stuff that you think is not that good.
That's right.
Show it to somebody else. Get a
That's
second
right.
or a third or a fourth opinion, from
I
somebody
love
you
that.
trust and somebody that's, one that's going to tell you honestly, and
That's
two
right.
that's not going to just trash you either,
That's right.
tell you all the reasons why you can't do something, which is what happens to most of us when we have a dream. The
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
closest to us seem to be not as, as encouraging.
Mm-hmm. It's the truth.
As
There's that book.
outside.
There's the book called The Dream Giver by Bruce Wilkinson. Do you know that one?
Yeah, sure.
Right? And it talks about the border bullies and
Right.
how when you're going to on the journey of acquiring your dream, you come across people who are really trying to keep you in as opposed to allowing you to explore more of
Right.
yourself and acquire that dream. So that's always a great reminder for people that some I remember a friend of mine, she released an album, a musical album, and I just expected her to have all of these sales. And
Right.
she said I had to learn very early on that my friends may not be my fans.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so, as an author, many times you're thinking that your friends are going to be the ones that buy your books and support this journey, friends and family, but they may not be your
Yeah.
demographic. And this
Right.
is a business. And
Right.
so we have to understand those pieces. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, and I think you're absolutely right. And that's a shame. And a big part of, probably 50% of it is they really are worried about you.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want you to be hurt. They don't want
Yeah.
you to be disappointed. That's probably about 50%. The other 50% of it maybe is a jealousy thing, or is a thing about they don't want to be left behind, or maybe they won't
Mm-hmm.
feel the same about them if you have some success and they don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of things going on with people, and we don't ever really know. But yeah,
Yep.
don't let other people steal your dreams. That would
Yes.
be another thing that I would tell you. And
Yes.
Kathleen and I would both tell you to find a supportive group or some people that are supportive or are doing something similar to you,
Yep.
and support them, and support each other in your journey.
Yeah.
So I was lucky. So I've had this story and I was so stunned, but she said, I think you ought to send it out. Well, back then this was 1988. So the only
Mm-hmm.
way you could publish was through traditional publishers. There was
Mm-hmm.
no internet. There was no social media.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent out, the 50 letters. I went to the
Mm-hmm.
library. I got the Writer's Digest. I found all the publishers that took submissions from children's books, and I submitted this story, and I got 48 rejections.
Oh goodness.
And it's like being stabbed in the heart, but there were just a couple of them that said, kind of interesting. We're just not buying
Mm-hmm.
anything right now. If you ever self-publish, maybe we put it in our catalog. So I got a little bit of encouragement, not a lot, but a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, I guess this publishing thing is not for me, like a lot of us do. I kind of put it
Mm-hmm.
away. I put it in the drawer. I jumped into entrepreneurship. I started a creative services business where I was doing like newsletters and annual reports and ads and stuff, and kind of semi-advertising, but really more print heavy because I
Mm-hmm.
office with a printer in those early days. But when you have a dream, it seems it comes around again. And so 5 years in to my business, I had cash flow. I had an artist. I had a client, the African American Museum, who said, well, we're going to have a children's book festival with the big library downtown. You've got a book, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, I had a manuscript.
Right.
I didn't have a book, but like I say, what I had was I had a printer who had been printing all my corporate stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I had a nonprofit stuff. I had an artist. So I went to that artist and I said, hey, here's my story. I need you to draw me these images. And I kind of told him what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, I got a printer. This is just one more job in the shop for me, right? I just sent over to my printer. We did the layout and he printed it. And, back then you had to print 2,500 copies, to get your price down that was reasonable enough. If you sold it, you actually made some money. Not really kind of understanding, well, that's $7,000 investment.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
It's just another job in the shop. And I was paying every 30 days. I get a bill from my printer every 30 days for all my corporate stuff. And this was just another job in the shop for me, So, wake up a couple of weeks later and you go, okay, wait a minute, what did I just do, But I did. So printed my first little book called Creative Monster. Of course, I didn't know anything about it. So
Uh-huh.
stapled it instead of it having a spine. And then, of course, found out the libraries wouldn't take it because it didn't have a spine on it,
Mm-hmm.
And I sold but I did. Went to the book show, sold my first 100 copies, said, yeah,
I know you did.
it's a great thing. About 2 days later, I woke up and said, dang, what am I going to do with these other 2,400 copies? They're sitting on the print shop, over at John's hat place. You look around, you go, oh my gosh. So anyway, and self-publishing was starting, but it wasn't by anything a mainstream kind of thing. And it was like, well, if you can get them with the wholesalers, we buy from the wholesaler. I mean, a couple of the local libraries, because I was a local author, they let me come and do a book signing or let me come out and talk about it a little bit, but it was a struggle. And, over these last, 30 years, I'm down to the last 10 copies basically. So I either gave away or sold. I sold about 2,000 of them, probably gave away 400 or 500 of them. Okay. But this was the long game, but I was learning.
Exactly.
Learn, you learn as you go. And that's the other thing with the publishing is I say all the time, there's so many moving parts. Yeah. And most of us can do certain parts of it, but most of us can't do all of it. Yeah. It's like any business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is a business like any other business, like you mentioned earlier. And that's the hardest thing, I think, for some people to understand.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, and it's so important, is that you learn as you go along.
Yeah.
And it helps you every step of the way. So we definitely encourage you, don't get so frustrated that it stops your movement. I was just thinking about you, and I've talked to several other authors who started their author's journey in the 80s, and some who started writing in, let's say, 87, 88, 89, but didn't finish their process until 2017.
Wow.
And just how much the process has changed over those years. So right. So you're talking about you had to mail out 50 letters and then wait.
Right?
Wait. However long it took. That's right.
Wait for them to come back in, and then they come in and there'll be no, or it just be, you could tell half of them were form letters, maybe they just got so many submissions or whatever. But it was heartbreaking at first. But I said, hey, I can do this myself. In 1992, I said I can do this myself. And even though it wasn't 25 years for me to write, it was, I did put it away for 5 years thinking it wasn't for me,
Yeah.
And a serendipitous thing happened, not something I had planned, but just a conversation. And I don't know how they even knew I had a book. I guess we had just talked about it at one point or something. And so, maybe I probably gave them away. I probably gave them a couple of copies because I had them.
Right.
I had 2,000 copies. But anyway, you never know. It's that one ththing. It's that one person.
Come on, that one conversation
that encourages you or comes, and I'll tell a story later on about that. You stand there all day, and then one person toward the end of the day comes by.
Yes.
And guess what? They are the person that can make a bigger decision.
Yes.
That would be more impactful for you. So you gotta engage with people. I mean, that's the other thing. A lot of authors don't want to engage with people. They just want to write. And I understand that too. But I tell people, I said there are two options for writing. You can write for yourself and stay in your room or hide out or whatever, or you can write to make money. Okay. Yeah. Those are two different things. Now, if you just want to write the family history or the family cookbook or some story that you have or something that you have, that's fine. And that's great. And I encourage you to do that because just the process helps you personally and creatively. But if you plan, if you want to have a career as an author, you have to begin to look at it as a business. You have to budget some money.
Yes.
I don't care if you get the second job or if you got a good job, you got to take 10% of that money and put it in a savings account. Say, this is my publishing account. At some point, a year from now, whatever. Hopefully it's not 5 or 10 or 20 years. It doesn't take that long anymore. You don't really want to wait that long anymore like you used to. But start saving a little money, and it doesn't need to cost you 50 or 100,000, but you're going to have to invest a couple of $1,000.
Yeah.
We always tell people a good cover, get a book design cover, because I have a lot of issues with clients who have somebody else do their artwork for them, and then I have to fix it. or I can't fix it. They have to go back to them to get it fixed. Because book design is different from designing a corporate brochure or an annual report or a logo. It's not the same. There are certain restrictions and limitations in publishing that you have to be aware of. And the other thing is to edit. I don't edit my stuff because I know I'm going to read it right. I know what it's supposed to say.
Come on.
And even if it doesn't say that.
I just had the opportunity. Look, I just had the opportunity to speak to a writers group this past weekend, and that's exactly what I shared with them, was that it is so important to hire an editor, and it need not be your friends, because they know the way that you talk and sound, and they will fill in, oh, well, this is what she meant. You need somebody who really doesn't know you. Now, you can use the same editor after time because they get to know your style and so forth. And that's the other thing too. You do want to make sure it's an editor that is comfortable with your genre, as you talked about earlier. So yes.
Sure. So, those are the two things that you almost have to pay for. And then obviously you're going to at some point have to pay some marketing or promotion or something.
Yes.
There's a lot of things you can do yourself today, but there are also some things that you want to consider, because the sad thing is, and Kathleen, in the 48 years, I have not found one thing that works for everybody except selling direct.
Come on.
If you're standing at a table, or you're out somewhere, or you're at a book signing, or you're just, talking to people, and you say, I have a book, have some in the car, whatever, I have some in my bag, whatever. That way, everybody can sell that way, even though not everybody's comfortable selling that way. And they all tell me at first that I can't do this. I can't sell this book until, and I say, stand here next to me, listen to what I say.
Yes.
I'm going to sell this book for you. And then you're going to be, and then I try to like sneak off, to get to go to the bathroom or whatever. So they're by themselves. And they have to talk to the next person that comes by.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
With some of my authors, but because it is uncomfortable. And if you weren't in some kind of marketing or sales, see, I was lucky in that I was in that business. My first 25 years, I had basically what most people would call an advertising agency, even though I learned on the job. I learned event management on the job, like the rodeo, which we're talking about. I learned media on the job. I didn't go to school. I didn't take classes. I didn't watch YouTube, channels, which you can do all of that today. I just learned by doing, and trial and error. But it was, the African American Museum gave me my first opportunity with my book. And then I was their agency. So we did all of their print collateral, educational programs, we did posters, we did invitations, we did catalogs. We did all of that. And then they had two major events. One of them was the Texas Black Invitational Rodeo, because the thing about museums is they get a lot of grant money and program money, but guess what? They don't get operations money. That money costs. Most grants and foundations and donations are specific to a specific thing.
Event.
And so, well, how do you keep the lights on and keep the staff paid? And so we had this rodeo, which was basically that money came in and got to go to whatever it needed to go to.
Fantastic.
And then they had a fancy ball and auction where they had an art auction, which supported what they did. They were an art museum, an African American, the first African American museum in the country, the United States. And so, that was the fancy dress up, Cool in the Gang or whoever, was the entertainment.
The artist, yes.
And so, that's how they made their other money. And so those two things, but I was just like, oh, well, the guy that's handling media, his dad had a heart attack. He had to go to Atlanta. Can you sit in on the meeting and just take some notes? So for him, free when he gets back. Well, that was 30 years ago. And I'm still here.
You're still sitting on the meeting.
I'm still doing that. So I unofficially became the historian of the Cowboys of Color Rodeo, the Texas Black Invitational Rodeo, because after that first meeting, I got, arm twisted. Well, come stay. And they had a great volunteer leader, a gentleman named Cliff Miller, who actually worked for GTE, if anybody remembers that became
Mm-hmm.
Verizon and
Mm-hmm.
got bought
Mm-hmm.
out. Well, Cliff was the vice president of diversity, and and so he marketing, and he was such a mentor and an influencer, and he was so much fun, and he had 30, there were 30 volunteers, and they were teachers and AT&T employees, and because back then the corporate employees used to really get involved with community stuff. And so those were great years, and I stayed because it was so fun, and it was
Yeah.
and it was, and I was learning so much about the history that I should have known and didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
My dad's Native American and my mother's Irish and Swedish, and so we're all a mix of something.
Yeah.
And my dad was English and Indian, Native American, and
Mm-hmm.
so Cherokee, and then my and I kind of got his look and feel, and then I've got my mother's Irish Swedish skin tone, but anyway, and so we're all a mix of cultures, and
Yeah.
there's not hardly any of us that when we start looking back that we don't have different
A blend.
places and heritage that we came from, and it's all important.
Yeah.
And and it does flow into our food and our music and our our sports, all of our
Definitely.
stuff, like rodeo. Even we've got a lot of things from the Spanish culture,
Yeah.
from toros and vaqueros, and the Spaniards brought horses to North
Mm-hmm.
America. And then, like you say, the trick roping and the horse training, and a lot of that came from Spaniards. Vaquero, that's cowboy. I mean,
Yeah.
lariat is rope. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
still a lot of our language. Rodeo
Mm-hmm.
was really a Spanish word that we then made rodeo
Mm.
with just a different inflection.
Yes.
But that's a Spanish word, and they would, like you say, it was a celebratory thing at haciendas,
Mm-hmm.
where they would show their horsemanship or their skill with
Yeah, their skill.
cattle or
Definitely.
whatever. And so,
Let me pause you for one moment, Liz, before we shift over into the rodeo and start talking about your work, like around Cleo Hearn, Mr. Black Rodeo. We'll get into some of your books. I want to pull, there's a comment and a question I want to highlight in the chat.
okay,
First, Dr. Wade wanted to reiterate that it was a good perspective to have is to view dollars spent during the publishing process as an investment rather than an expense. So she wanted to underscore that, which definitely we do, because sometimes it's like, oh my goodness, I'm spending all of this money. But the reality is, it is an investment because you're looking to get a return on
right,
that investment. You're not just spending it out, never to come anything back. But that also goes to your point. What's your purpose of writing?
right,
Are you writing for release? Like it's cathartic, you enjoy it, you have no intentions of sharing it with the world, which is fine, which is a lot of times what one does in a journal, or whether it's creative, or if you're writing as because you desire to be an author,
right,
meaning that you actually want to create a business and receive money for this. Because I know when I wrote my first book and people are like, oh my goodness, you're an author. I said, I'm not an author till someone buys a book. Other
right,
than that, all I did was write another paper. And I'm
right.
used to
Yeah,
writing papers, right?
yes, or paper, or
Right. So Dr. McGee said, do you proofread and have readers for
um,
your work?
most people do. A lot of people do, and I think if you're writing fiction, that certainly is a viable thing. Because you want to get that response back to your characters and things like that. Because I write mostly nonfiction, and I both basically work with authors who write nonfiction or children's books. I have a couple of Christian fiction and novel writers, but they're older folks, and I think that's a good thing. But we basically use editors because I have a group of editors, and so I have different editors that read different genres. There are developmental editors that are better for, like, if you're trying to develop characters or location or theme or storylines or locations and stuff, versus a grammatical editor, who's looking for those periods and those commas and those prepositional
Mm-hmm.
phrases and those run-on sentences, which, all of us have a tendency to engage in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But in the editing process now and in the technology that we have today, you're editing all along.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you load the book, you're proofing it. When before you put, when you get it and when you're working on the layout, you're proofing it because you're reading it. So, I mean, when I get a book project, I probably read it 10 to 20 times.
Mm-hmm.
And almost every time I find something. But at first I read for content, and then I read for, flow. And is something missing here? Do we need to add something? How do we get from this chapter to this chapter? This just doesn't quite jive. Mm-hmm. What can we do here? And then the very last thing I do is read for grammar and punctuation and all of that kind of thing. But like I say, all along you're editing and you're proofing just because. Mm-hmm. But if you're writing fiction, romance, spy thrillers, sci-fi, things like that, Christian fiction, whatever, a story, maybe a biblical story that has some background that really wasn't there, that you create in your imagination. Mm-hmm. Those things you probably do need beta readers. Okay. Or, you need a group of 2 or 3 people that will read that for you before, because like you say, we're just too close to it. Yeah. If you don't have that, or you can't find somebody, set it aside for a day or two, go off and do some other things and come back and read it again. Because when you come back and read it again, the mistakes jump off the page.
Yes, they do.
And it's just because, but otherwise, like you say, you just can't read it every day, because you're not going to see mistakes. You're going to read it right, like we've talked about previously. So, but a great question.
She says, thank you. She says, okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about
our time too.
Yeah, I know. I'm watching it and I'm going, all right, let me get you to talk about some of your books. So you became the historian in this space now around Cowboys of Color, the Black rodeo, and so forth. And what made you then say, I'm going to create children's books and activities?
What we did is I did some like brain related stuff. I did left brain, right brain. I did some books for schools and librarians, public schools and librarians in between my children's book. But my mother passed away in 2009, and Cleo actually came to me, and we were having lunch, I guess, him and his lovely wife.
Tell people who Cleo is.
Oh, so Cleo is considered Mr. Black Rodeo. His name's Cleo Hearn. He was the first African-American, one of 8, to serve in the Presidential Honor Guard. He was the first African-American to go to college on a rodeo scholarship, the first African-American to win a rodeo championship in calf roping in 1970. When he started in the 50s, late 50s and 59, he couldn't rope at the regular rodeos because he was Black, because of the color of his skin. But he had the best times, and they made the mistake of posting the times. And the audience said, well, who's that Cleo Hearn fella? How come we didn't get to see him if he's got the best time? He got to rope after the rodeo or before the rodeo, but not during the rodeo when the crowd was there. And so basically the audience and the other cowboys forced the rodeo promoters to let him perform because he was so committed and he was so good and he was so personable and everybody loved him and they wanted to help him and encourage him because he's a lovely person. And so then he founded the Texas Black Invitational Rodeo, or a Texas Black Rodeo Association. And took rodeos to Harlem in the early 70s for 10,000 kids. And then in 85, he started the Texas Black Invitational Rodeo for the African American Museum. And that's our longest running rodeo. We have put that rodeo on every year since 1985. I started in 92. Wow. So we had like a 38th anniversary just this past year. So the only year we didn't do it was one year during COVID.
And is that the one that's Martin Luther King Day
No,
weekend
this
in
one is
January?
actually at Fair Park in the summer in July. So we do
Okay.
it now. We originally did it Memorial Day weekend, then they extended school and we did Juneteenth. And
Gotcha.
Juneteenth's a big thing down here in Texas because that's where the announcements was made 2
Yeah.
years after the war was over that slaves were freed. Texas
Mm-hmm.
didn't know that because we didn't have communication like we have today. And so there were so many Juneteenth celebrated, we moved to National Day of the Cowboy, which is the
Gotcha.
last Saturday in July of every
Oh.
year. And that's celebrated all over the United States, this National Day of the Cowboy.
Mm. I
So
didn't know there was such a thing. Liz, when I was 5, I declared I was going to move to Texas and become a cowboy. Now, I didn't. No, I didn't even know cowgirls existed.
you
So
was gonna
it
be a
had to be a
cowboy.
cowboy because it was the Lone Ranger, and I would take
Right.
my double Dutch rope and turn it into a lasso, and I would
So,
do all types of stuff. So I did end up moving to Houston as a grown person, but I didn't become a cowboy or grow at that point. But go ahead.
right. Well, but we made you an honorary cowgirl now.
I receive it.
You get now for sure. So
I can get a
so
hat
that's
like
how it
yours.
started. But he asked me, what would you really like to do? And I said, well, Cleo, I said, we've got all of these wonderful people in their hundreds, 90s and hundreds. They're passing away. And they were storytellers. Minority cultures told their stories around the campfire, around the kitchen table, and in the family and in the community. But if you didn't live in the community, you didn't know these people. And these were extraordinary people who lived wonderful lives because of their choices, And we were losing those stories. And I said, I'd really like to tell some of those stories. And so he said, okay, I'll help you. So he invested part of the money. And we printed, 5,000 copies of this. This is a middle school reader.
Mm-hmm.
So this was actually for middle school because they study Texas or state history in the 7th grade and American history in the 8th grade.
Gotcha.
And that's why, we did this book. But it's, it's a 2 or 3 page story. Occasionally some of the stories are 4-page stories.
Mm-hmm.
And this is people that lived in the 1800s. We started with people that lived in the 1800s because they were beginning to die off, and then we also included people that are living today. So this is 31 stories. There's 16, I think, from the past, and then 15 that are living today. Because kids today, they don't realize these jobs still exist. They don't know that they can be a cowboy, especially if they live in the city. They don't know that they can be a park ranger. They don't know that they can be a farmer or have an urban garden, and more now than they used to. But this was 10 or 15 years ago. And so, but then everybody kept asking us, well, do you have a children, like an early children's or primary type version of it? And so that's the new book that we have. We do have Cleo's book, and we have coloring books in addition to. Sorry, I lost.
Yeah,
I lost connection. But we always do a children's book, a coloring book too, because you never know what age the kids are. And this is basically, we do the story, a little bit less of the story and the picture for the kids to color. And then these are companion children's books so that they can color it the same way.
Yeah.
Or you can see the stories a little bit longer, but then there's pictures of Cleo when he was like riding a stick horse. Nobody in his family was a cowboy, and they don't know where this came from, but he loved horses.
Yes.
He met a black cowboy when he was 9, and he said that's what he wanted to do the rest of his life. And he was very focused on that. It was great. But we took basically this book and repurposed it. So you can do that too. You can take your stories and repurpose them in different versions.
Yes.
We could do an audio book. We could do an animated book like Dr. Kathleen has.
Yeah.
And this is the cover of the children's book that we've done. So these are the different characters. So there was a lady, Johanna July, who raced horses for the military. Her father had the contract and he passed away. But that was a way for her to make a living in the late 1800s and the 1880s. There was one female Buffalo soldier, Kathy Williams, who signed her name Williams Kathy.
Oh, wow.
She knew they would call her Private Kathy, and she wanted to be able to respond instead of making up a name. But she was a tall woman for the time, and she had actually worked in the house during the military, during the Civil War, for a general, they were captured, they were slaves, and they were captured by the Northern group. And so she actually had learned to read and write because she had worked in the house as a slave, but she knew she could work in the fields or she could work in the house. And that was the only, even after the Civil War being free, there still wasn't a lot of opportunity for women. And her cousins were signing up. So she said, well, I can walk as far as you can. I can ride a mule or a horse. I can shoot a gun, And so back then, you just had to have 10 fingers and you had to have your teeth. And, that was kind of the physical exam. It wasn't like today where you had like a real physical. And she served 2 years before they found out she was a woman. But the rumors were beginning. Her cousins knew. But other people, but they began to suspect that she might be. And so they said, you got to muster out. I mean, you got to do something because we're going to all be court-martialed. We're going to all get in trouble. And so she went to the infirmary and waited for a doctor because it was a white doctor who did not want to basically give medical care to black soldiers.
Yes.
Finally, she pretended to have a heart attack and they came in and then, and then they said, oh my God, Brother Kathy's a woman, They made her muster out and go 100 miles away so nobody would know that she served 2 years. This white, general at the fort. And, but anyway, we know because she applied for disability later on.
Look at that.
And he keeps great records.
Wow.
The military. So those records, they denied her, of course, because it was illegal for women to be in the military before 1945. This was in 1880, 68, 67, 68. And so you can find those records. And so one of our living history presenters, one of our ladies that plays this character, she went and got the actual copies of the actual documents from DC, from the military archives, and said where they denied her because she wasn't supposed to be serving.
Wow.
Well, your stories can come from anywhere. And I write about real people. These are real people that live. We are getting their stories from their family, and then we're writing that in a condensed version, publishing it and sharing it with people because we want people to know this history. And, I still write longhand and then I type it in, and that's a proofing and an editing process too for me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just something about writing it by hand that just is better for my brain. That's how my brain works more. And if you want to type on your computer or you want to type on your phone or your iPad or whatever, anything is okay. There is no one way to write.
Yes.
And there is no wrong way. So whatever you're comfortable with, try some different things.
Yeah.
You probably do need to find a place where you can write that's kind of quiet and it's your writing place. I don't care if it's a desk in your, in your bedroom, or maybe if you're lucky, you got an office, or maybe it's just a chair. And sometimes you have to put all your stuff in a bag or a backpack. So you can keep it, especially if you've got kids or dogs or pets, you don't want to get into whatever you're writing. But there's something about going to that place that this is my writing place, that your brain goes, oh, Kathleen's ready to write. We got a job to do here, or we've got a process, we've got to get to it,
Yeah.
And it just makes it easier the next time, if you go away and then you come back, you go, oh, this is my writing place. And so we encourage people to do those kinds of things. And then I got into helping other people. I got out of the advertising. I always wrote my own stuff. I always published my own stuff. But I had a couple of doctor friends taken advantage of pretty drastically by some vanity press. So I would say anybody that comes to you and says, oh, we want to publish your stuff, we want to print this or that, if they call you, be suspicious.
Yes.
Because they're probably trying to take your money.
Yep.
I'm not saying they all are, but you need to test it. And I'm not saying you don't need to pay somebody that has skill like me, but it's, always test it out. Always get 2 or 3 opinions, get 2 or 3 estimates from different people.
Yes.
But, I had this vanity press take my friend to the cleaners to about $50,000, $100,000. And I got so mad about it. I said, I can't stand this. I've got to do something. So that's when I started helping people publish. So that's what I've done the last 15 years. And I had one of the first Amazon stores, and we actually had two of the first Amazon stores online. We moved our brick and mortar retail store online when my dad got sick, because we didn't know how he would do. And we tried to sell our business, and it fell, 2 or 3 times we had somebody, and it always fell through.
Yeah.
Because small business funding is a little bit hard, but it's a great ride. It's a great journey. There's nothing better than having your book, holding it in your hand, and touching it and feeling it, and people saying, I really like that story you wrote, or that really touched me. A lot of people write because they've had some kind of trauma in their life. And I can tell you, one person comes to you and say, that really helped me. I had a similar situation when I was a child, or I had a issue with a family member, or I had a divorce, or whatever it is. I got fired, I got laid off, whatever. I got passed over multiple times. There's somebody else that's been in that situation too. And so if you have something that will help people, I think it's selfish for you to keep it inside. I think your purpose, one of your purposes, is to share those stories with other people, so that other people can be helped, whether that's informational, whether that's education, or whether that's entertainment. And people write for multiple reasons, and we write mostly for education and entertainment, but you can, maybe you have a medical thing, maybe you're an accountant or a finance person, and you figured out a system that works, and that's worked for people or your clients or yourself. You owe that to other people to share that with them, so that maybe they can follow a similar path. Or, and you can always modify things to fit your own personal situation, but yeah, we love to encourage authors. It's a great life. It's a great process. Just the process of writing and creating, gives you mental stimulation. It helps you. It's going to help you later on with things like dementia or whatever. I'm not saying you won't get Parkinson and dementia and some other things, but as you keep your mind active and as you do new things, new neural pathways, connections get made. And so writing is a great way to kind of hold some of that stuff off, maybe. In the long term. And they're finding out more and more every day. And as you can tell, I've been fascinated by the brain for 40 years.
For a long time now. Let me put this up here. Edna, who is a fantastic wellness advisor. If anybody needs one, check out the Health Zone Florida. She said, we love attending the annual Black Rodeo performance in Jacksonville.
So anyway, so most people don't know, but Cleo, basically, we've been doing the rodeos for over 50 years. There's a Bill Pickett rodeo out of California that travels across the United States. And I'm not sure they're Jackson. I think the Jacksonville one is probably, or Perry, which is probably the Real Cowboy Association. But that also was an offshoot of ours. They came to us. They wanted to do these smaller rodeos in these smaller markets. And because Cleo was working full time, he couldn't do it. So he called a friend of his and said, hey, do you want to take these smaller rodeos on? Which actually then became a tour where they go to Shreveport and Jacksonville, Mississippi, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, East Texas. They kind of took the East Texas road. And but we do our rodeo, our Martin Luther King rodeo, is a part of the Fort Worth Stock Show and Rodeo, which is the first stock show of the year across the country. Then later on, the National Western, which is where Cleo won his calf roping championship, the first Black gentleman to win a championship, was in Denver, Colorado. The Bill Pickett Rodeo will actually be there during Martin Luther King that week, I think. But that started because Lou went and saw, he was a music promoter, and he went to Cheyenne and saw the rodeo and said, well, why aren't there any black rodeos? They said, well, you need to call Mr. Black Rodeo Cleo Hearn. And so, of course, he called Cleo, and Cleo told him how to get stock and how to get cowboys and how to get set up and what to do. And, and they have a license agreement with the family who really hardly exist anymore. There's a couple of like great nieces, I think, that are still living. Bill Pickett's family, but he was from Texas, Taylor, Texas, just down the piece. And but it's a great, the Western history is great fun for me. And like you say, I have some Native American, and my family was in Oklahoma, and they were part of the land rush days. They came over from Alabama to Oklahoma when land was available, and so they were kind of those pioneers. My grandmother was in a Conestoga wagon, and she told stories about, being a little girl in the coyote talon and worrying about if it was Indians or bandits or whoever. And so, so I have a little bit of that history on both sides of my family. And so it is, we need to tell our stories because that's what connects us. And that's what makes us human too. And nothing like art and storytelling and music to break down barriers, because we are much more alike than we are different.
So tell me this, Liz, because as our time is getting ready to come to a close, and audience, you can see why Liz and I could talk and talk and talk. She is a wealth of knowledge. This is why back in the day when she would join us on our weekly radio show, I mean, it was just endless, ideas and information. For you, what services are you still providing for people? If there's, budding, aspiring writers, or even people who have written and say, I would like to consult with her or hire her for something, what are you available for?
Well, I'm always happy to talk to people. I'm not doing so much full production anymore. You can go to lizlawless.com. That's LIZLAWLESS. That's basically our author blog. It's called The Author Adventure. And we have 70 or 80 articles there about writing and publishing and marketing and distribution. Because in my mind, there are 5 things. There's writing, there's publishing, there's launching, there's marketing, and there's distribution. And marketing and distribution are separate. Marketing is the promotion, the telling people about your book. Distribution is who's going to buy that book. Is it a library? Is it a school? Is it a college? Is it a church? Is it a corporation? Is it an individual? Is it a male or a female? So there are lots of different varieties. And that's why we say publishing has so many moving parts. But you can read those. Most of those articles are free. You have to put your email in, and you have to choose none, or you can pay I think it's $19.99 or $20.99 a month for, because there are some paid articles, which are more like interviews with authors, similar to what we're doing today, and some longer content that is paid content. And so you can but there are a number of articles that are free that won't cost you anything, that will tell you about the writing process, like 7 steps to writing, setting up your writing project, or how to do editing, or all of those different things related to publishing, the types of publishing that exist and what you should do. Q&A, like these are the 15 questions you need to ask yourself or ask somebody else, and these are the 15 questions you don't even know you need to ask.
Real talk. Yes.
But yeah, so Liz Lawless, and then our website is theauthoradventure.com. That's where all our book publishing stuff is. And you can see we've got 50 or 60 of our client books up there as well. You can scroll through those books. Our books are there. I have a book with my partner, Russ Johns. We also have a YouTube channel, and the same thing. It's Author Adventure. That's our author stuff. And we have about 50 or 60 interviews there with authors, similar to what Kathleen's doing. And then we have Wild West Diversity, a YouTube channel, and the blog and all of that is at wildwestdiversity.com. And that is, we've got about 70 or 80, almost 100 interviews there with cowboys or horse trainers or decorators or musicians, just anybody that might be involved somehow in that Western lifestyle. Rodeo cowboys, of course, because we have access to a lot of those people. But yeah, check us out in any of those places on social media. It's either going to be author Liz Lawless or Lawless Liz. And if you just put in Google my name, I'm probably going to come up.
Yes, definitely. And I've put all these different links in the chat room. So
Okay.
those links should be live. You should be able to click on them. I've also put them in the write-up underneath this video. So it will be on the YouTube channel. So for those who may be listening from other sources, please be sure to come over to Ask Dr. Walls 525 on YouTube. And in the write-up, like I said, there are these links. Well, Liz,
All right.
tell us
Appreciate it.
what is your word of inspiration, final thought that you'd like to give the
Hey,
people today?
don't give up. Yeah, keep writing. Find a community to be encouraged by, and publish, and it shouldn't take you 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 12 or 16 years. You can do it in a couple of years. The traditional publishing, if you don't need control of things, then traditional publishing might be a way, but it's going to be a longer process. It's going to be 2 to 3 years. If you like creative control like me and you want to be involved in all the different aspects of your publishing career or your author career, then you should self-publish. But know that you do have to make some investment in that, but you get more of the profit back too. And so usually it doesn't take more than a year or two to get a return on your investment. If you're out engaging, if you're going to book signing or you're speaking or you're willing to do those things, you can accelerate your process. But that's what I would tell you. Yeah. And if you want to have a career or be a publisher, in 2025, we will be doing that kind of a master class kind of thing and that'll be a monthly meeting of whatever, but that obviously is a little bit higher investment because by the end of the year, you will have a business, you will have clients, you will know how to sell to those clients and how to engage with people and give estimates about what things cost. And we'll always talk about the numbers and things like that. I don't have any problem telling people what things cost because, and usually it's a range, but like you say, for editing, we talked about somewhere between $750 and $2,500, depending on, are you writing a 40-page children's book or are you writing a 300-page novel? I mean,
That's right.
You gotta think about how much work's involved, but yeah, but those things are easy, and there's so many resources today that you can go and find out. But there's nothing greater than being an author and engaging with people and sharing your stories. So I appreciate Kathleen so much that and her husband Ed, wonderful husband Ed. They let me actually have one of my first shows. Asked me to do a 30-minute show on their channel, Sisters in Harmony, so many years ago when we first met. And so, and then the Texas Library Conference is in Dallas this year. So we'll see Dr. Kathleen Walls again, and she'll be down. It's also my birthday. So
it is.
And that's the first time that's ever happened. So, anyway, but I would encourage you to go to writers' conferences or other conferences. And once you get published, look for there's Christian publishing events. There are book selling events. There are school, there are principals that get together. There are library conferences. There are studies conferences. There are language arts conferences for creative writing. So whatever writing you're doing, there's a place for it. And there's some kind of conference or place where you can go and meet people.
Definitely. Well, I definitely thank you, Liz, for sharing this time with us. I know the audience has definitely appreciated all of the information that you have provided. I'm sure Liz will join us again in the new year. So
yeah, and we'll actually maybe have a new book after the first year. We're doing our coloring books right now to go along with this. So we just published our first coloring book, which was The People from Yesterday. It's called African American Western Legends Yesterday. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll have our Today one coming out. Was hoping to get that out before the holidays, but and don't give up too. If you miss a deadline, just extend it.
That's right.
Don't get so frustrated that you didn't get something done by a certain time. There's always the next week or the next month or the next quarter. So So try to do something diligently, every week or every month or, every day if you can, but don't get discouraged.
Yeah.
If you get
Yeah.
discouraged, you go to Kathleen's YouTube channel and listen, or you go to Liz's YouTube channel
That's
and
right.
watch something
And
and
get
be
back up.
encouraged.
So same way Cleo Hearn, if you fall off a horse, you got to get back up.
That's
So
it.
make sure you get back up. All right, y'all. Well, be sure this afternoon at 6 p.m. I'll be talking with another author. So be sure to come back and join us at Ask Dr. Walls 525. I've been trying to get as many authors in before the holiday season is over so that people can buy books for themselves as well as gift books for others and just
Do the
introduce.
gift of literacy, because that's
Yes,
the gift that keeps on giving. You can give
come
people
on.
food or chocolate or flowers, but all that stuff goes away within a day or two.
Yes,
Books people keep,
and
especially
pass
yeah.
on. Yeah, it's the truth. It's the truth. All right, everyone. I'll see you in a couple hours. Have a fantastic rest of your day, Liz. Thank you as always, and we will talk soon.
All
All
right.
right.
Bye.
Be well, everyone. Bye bye.